Building a high-performance team can be the difference between a company that loses money and a company that makes money. Not only that, aside the money, a good performing team is less headaches. Why? Because the team knows what they need to do and they will execute on their tasks. If you're a manager, you don't want to be micromanaging the team. You don't want to have to be behind them making sure they're doing their stuff. If they know what to do, then you don't have to do any of that stuff. And it's the same thing for a business owner. You want to have somebody that can take the reins of the stuff that you used to do so that you can have time to implement in other areas of the business. So how do you get a good performing team? Well, number one, the employees need to know what they're working for. They need to have incentive and goals, which we already covered in a previous video, so I'm not going to dive too much into that, but they need to have those. They'll get their salary, either bi-weekly, monthly, or semi-weekly, which my advice to you, if you can control that, is to give it to them more often than less often. Teachers often complain, and everybody I know that has a salary that comes in once a month complains about it. If you can control that, I'd give it to them more often. That way they don't have complaints on that end. But most importantly, high performers need guidance. You want to be sure that when you build a team, you're giving them guidance as to what their goals actually are and how they're going to get there. And as well as giving them goals that align to their strong suits. You don't want to give a goal to somebody that's in a position that is going to have trouble meeting that goal. Even if you say, well, that's going to motivate him and that's going to push them or her. It doesn't work like that. It's going to have to be a goal that's attainable, and you don't want to stress them out by giving them a completely different goal. Make it attainable, make it easy for them to understand, and make it relatable to what they're actually doing when they're in the front lines. So for example, my expertise in supply chain and logistics, and one of the metrics that I've worked with previously where we're scored by is scorecards, where it's a carrier scorecard. And sometimes, the goal kind of varies at the percentage that you want to have, but ideally it should be over 95, let's say 98 in this case. And let's say you meet the 98% agreements on the scorecard. You might get a bonus, you might get an incentive, you might get something, you might get an extra contract later on, and that metric serves its purpose where you can actually leverage off that type of information, right? You can leverage off your goal and make it attainable. And when you reach it, it opens up the opportunities for more type of work. That means more revenue, that means more bottom line, that means more employees, more everything. Better for the economy, better for you, better for your business. So what exactly does the customer scorecard in my example actually push, right? Where does it affect this way? It pushes customer service, it pushes deliveries, and it pushes to have on-time performance with all of our metrics. And what that does for us is it sets a baseline, meaning, okay, we're actually being graded on this. As a department, we're being graded on our ability to be there on time, to respond on time, to bring up concerns on time, to follow up on meetings. It's various things, but ideally the point is that it set a metric that we had to follow, and that baseline was crucial for the performance of the team. Now, I really want to cover hiring as well, because hiring is something that you may not directly have to do. Like, you're not actually posting the positions. You may have an HR department, but if you're hiring somebody that's going to be in your team, then I suggest you also be part of the hiring process, unless it's somebody, super down on the totem pole and you're like way up there. Obviously, if you're a director, you're not going to be interviewing somebody that's a clerk, obviously, right? But if it's somebody that's at a high level, you definitely want to be involved, because it's going to be somebody that directly affects the bottom line in this case and is part of the operation and the management levels. So you don't want to bypass that and just say, I don't really want to get involved in that. No, like you honestly should, because that employee is going to affect you. And I want to set something clear. HR does screenings, unless HR is interviewing for an HR position, right? But let's say they're not. Let's say HR is interviewing for a position that's something outside of their department. They just do screenings. If you've ever been in an interview, you've been called by HR and you sometimes ask him, so can you tell me something about this position? Like, what exactly am I going to do? Because the job post is very generalized. It's super broad. And they're like, well, this is what I have. This is what the hiring manager gave me. This is what I know. But if you really want to get an answer, you're going to have to ask the hiring manager. That's very important, because the HR person is doing the initial screening. They're doing the bare minimum. That means that you need to have a manager that knows how to interview people so they can get the right people in the job. So HR does the initial screening, they send you the employee, you're about to interview them. What do? Okay, you're gonna have to focus on 4 things: skill, experience, culture, and communication. And if you're a business owner and you are the one that's interviewing the people in your startup, or if it's a business that's already been ran for a couple of years, then you're still doing the interviews at this point. If you are, then this is even more important because it directly impacts you and your life. If you're a W-2 employee, then you might just be like, man, I need to fill this spot, it doesn't matter. So skills. Hiring a new employee has to mean that their previous skills transition into their current skills. Now, what do I mean by skills? Am I really talking about work experience here? Not so much. When I say skills, I mean what they actually present to the table as far as their tool sets. For example, if you have somebody that is very good at public speaking, right? And you can see from the resume that they've done public speaking, that they're comfortable speaking in groups, that they're okay with presentations, then that's a skill. And that skill may or may not align with what you need them to do. If all they're going to do is data engineer, but their biggest skill set is public speaking, and you're going to just have them be engineers, then you may not really need that skill, right? No, I'm not saying it's bad to have, but I'm saying if you have a list of interviewees and one of them has their skill set in public speaking and the other one has their biggest skill set in coding, and your position is for an engineer, out of those two, which one would you feel is a better fit, right? So the skills that they bring to the table have to align with the position that they're interviewing for. And how you get this if it's not on the resume, where you're going to have to ask them, like, tell me something about your skills. What is your most prominent skill? What is something that you've really done in your previous job that you didn't have to do that kind of pushed you above the rest of your peers? So let's talk a little bit about experiences, right? Well, obviously you want to have their experiences match the job that they're hiring for or that you're hiring for, because you don't want to hire somebody as an HR rep if they've only done safety. Doesn't make sense. It might have some gray areas, but not really. You also don't want to hire somebody into perhaps a driver manager role if all they've done before is clerical input, right? They may have some gray areas, but if it's a really high position, you need people who have done the task before, or who have at least stepped into that role and gotten their feet wet a little bit and have a proper understanding. Now, if you feel that this person could have those experiences, but maybe they just didn't add them to the resume, well, guess what? You can ask them stuff about the job board or about the actual position, because you're the professional in that field. You're the hiring manager. You know what they're going to do. So why don't you ask them, okay, if you were in this specific scenario, what would you do? And you give them a scenario that actually happens there at your facility, because that would give them the perfect time to shine or to fail. Because if they don't have a proper answer, then you know that they might just not know how to resolve the issues that are happening right now at your department. And communication, you want to make sure that the person you're hiring is able to communicate themselves, because if they're not, you might run into a position where this person just doesn't tell you the impasses that they're facing in the operation, and it could cause bottlenecks. It can reduce the bottom line. Communication is very key. And one of the biggest tips I have to give you guys is do more than one interview, please. If you only interview one person for the position, even if you think you struck gold, please interview more. You don't lose anything in interviewing more. You already have a position open. You're already in the mentality that you're going to have to interview people. Even if that person is the person you hire, the first one, you might ask a question later on that you didn't ask that person. You're like, oh man, I might have gotten them there, right? Write it down, set up a second interview, ask it, tell them how you feel, if you really feel that person is good, you can have more than one interview just to be 100% positive. But interview more than one person, because you never know. Also, don't hire people who you feel don't have a clue on what they're doing. You're not here to teach. Okay, you're here to put in somebody in a position that they should know what they're doing, and so they can perform. They're not going to come in and start like, okay, what's the first day for class? No, you need to come in running. They need to have an understanding. Now, every business has different processes. Obviously, the first month, they're going to learn. I'm just saying, you shouldn't teach them from scratch, right? They should have an understanding of other aspects of the business. They should have an understanding of how things are ran. They just don't know specifically how this company is ran. Maybe they had a P&L before that they were looking at, and it was completely different format than the one that your company has, and they have to kind of relearn the P&L, what this specific line means in yours. Maybe there's expenses that are broken down into further details as opposed to the previous company where maybe the expenses were in bulk and you didn't really have that detail. Maybe supplies in these two companies mean two different things. You know what I mean? So yes, there's going to be learning, but I'm saying if they've never read a P&L before and they don't know how to read a P&L or do the expenses or tell you what the bottom line is, then you're going to have an issue, right? Because you're going to have to teach them from scratch. Also, make sure you have a questionnaire for your interviewees. You don't want to go in and start thinking off the top of your head what the questions are going to be. You should have these questions already written down. And yes, you might take a detour and you might add another question. You might remove one because they already answered it because the conversation went in a certain manner or whatever. But having an outline helps you keep track of what you need to do. Because if you don't have an outline, guess what? You don't have anywhere to really direct the conversation, and you're going to lose track, and you might make it a 15-minute meeting when it could have been a 30-minute interview and gotten a lot of information that you really needed from the employee. Please write down a questionnaire that you're going to ask all the employees. Make it the same. Make sure that you highlight 3 important ones so you're going to make it across the board. Like, what is the biggest challenge you've ever faced and how did you overcome it? Tell me about a time where you actually messed up as an employee and what you did moving forward. Tell me about a time where you had to go against the grain and eventually it turned out to be something good. You know, something like that. But make sure you ask the same questions to the same employees because you get the right type of interview and you get the type of responses that you want to hear from them and you get to kind of filter out, right? You don't want to ask somebody a really hard question and then the last employee you ask him no hard question and you're like, wow, this guy's really good. And no, maybe you just didn't ask the right questions. Also, another tip for the question is to make sure they actually revolve around what they do. You don't want to ask questions that don't pertain to the operational aspects of their job that they're interviewing for, right? So if they're hiring for a safety manager, you're not going to be like, how many people have you interviewed? Like, what? What do you mean? Yeah, how many people have you interviewed? Like, no, that question has nothing to do with that. Vice versa, if you have an interview for an HR rep, you wouldn't be asking them how many tables they've served, right? Like, no, you have to make questions aligned to the specific position, and please make sure that they're suitable and professional. Also, you want to hire people whose skills complements the rest of the team. Meaning, if you have 5 highly motivated employees, it might not be beneficial to hire a 6th one, right? You might need somebody that's more passive. If you have 5 passive employees, then you might need somebody who's a little bit more innovative, somebody who's very loud, somebody who seems more outgoing. Make sure that you have skills that complement each other because a diverse group of individuals gives you better results. And lastly, make sure you actually get to know them. Outside of the work questions, ask them stuff about their personal life because you might get some information from them regarding their personal life and how they answer and that maybe you weren't expecting, right? For example, I've had to interview drivers and there's times where the positions that we have open are only at night. And then you ask them, right? Like, well, what do you do in your off time? Oh, well, I have 6 kids and 4 of them are between 2 to 5 and I'm helping my wife and this and that. And then you ask them, oh, okay, and you're good to sleep? You get enough sleep? Yeah, actually I don't. Maybe I get like 3-4 hours of sleep a day. And you're like, okay, well, did you consider that when you applied for the position? Because it's at night and you might not be able to drive if you're only sleeping 4 hours. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I don't know if this is a good fit. You know what I mean? But you get to get some information that could really suit you and that you may not have considered because you didn't ask. And lastly, once they come in, make sure you train them. That is the most important thing is train. Hiring people from other companies really gives your company an idea and a perspective of how the competition is doing. So it's really good. And they come in with a fresh mindset. They're able to implement things that maybe you hadn't thought about that is very common in with competitors, and it really helps your business grow. So you do want to have a company with a lot of different types of people, different types of backgrounds, because it'll build a stronger community. And lastly, make sure you know their strengths and you train. You gotta train the new employees. They need to be up to par, they need to be up to speed as soon as possible because the faster they get to that point, the faster they can increase the bottom line. And if you've seen a couple of my videos, I always mention the bottom line. And what I'm trying to get across from that comments is that there's a vast amount of ways that your bottom line is impacted. And that's it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you guys liked it. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I have a link down below to the school community. Please join. We're all learning. We're going to get some insight from people from all different areas of expertise. And there's also a link to my website, and I have some coaching availability if you guys are interested. Keep an eye on that. And thank you guys so much for watching. Take care and be safe.